Well, welcome back. This is part two of a two-part series on ultra-processed foods, really the double jeopardy of how these ultra-processed foods not only can contribute to causing these cardiometabolic diseases like diabetes, but also how they complicate the management of these diseases. And if you want to know who I am or a little bit about my background, please check into part one, and you'll see my bio is on the second slide on part one. So part one was talking about the what and the why. What are these ultra processed foods and why are they so dangerous? And now we're going to talk about part two. How do you help your patients be more informed about these? And then also, how do you help them make behavior changes so that they can have a lower consumption of these dangerous food? And I should say food products because they're not really foods. So here's some practical tips. Just like you wouldn't start talking about smoking to somebody that doesn't smoke, it's important to just assess where your patient is and just asking the person, what do you already know about ultra processed foods? How many ultra processed food servings do you have in a day? And just see what they say. They may say, like, oh my gosh, I don't touch them, or they have no idea what you're talking about. And then it's important, I think, this is an area that I think people are very accepting of these toxic foods, and they'll sit there and say, I'm never going to smoke. I will never vape. I'll never drink alcohol. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to do all these great things. And then they're just going to eat some very processed foods that are extremely toxic, if not more toxic than some of the things they're already doing for their health. So I think it's an awareness. So warning patients that these foods are dangerous. They are not safe to consume, especially in large quantities. Inform everyone that's at risk for cardiometabolic dysfunction that these foods do put you at a much greater risk, in some cases 30%, 40% greater risk of getting cardiovascular disease, dying from cardiovascular disease, getting diabetes, obesity, depression, and anxiety is not on here, but I would throw anxiety on there as well, but also all causes of premature death. So very important that they recognize these are not safe. For people who are particularly at risk for diabetes, or maybe just somebody saying, where do I start? These are the top four areas that I think are the most dangerous based off of the research I've seen. And trying to eliminate those sugar sweetened beverages, that includes the energy drinks, the sweet coffees, the sodas. And then the artificially sweetened drinks are not really a healthy alternative. I always have people ask me, which is better? I'm like, well, it's like, which is better, cocaine or heroin? They're both pretty bad. So if you can get rid of either one of them, that's great. And eating or drinking very small amounts of these is also recommended. So ultra processed meats, I find people don't know what those are. So tell them it's like deli meats, sausage, bacon, hot dogs, anything with those nitrates and nitrites in them. And then sugary snacks. This includes your candies and cookies and pastries and ice creams, especially the ice creams with those emulsifiers added to them. If you look at the ingredients and it says more than three or four ingredients that you understand, it is a highly ultra processed food. Inform patients that if they already have a cardiometabolic dysfunction, already have a cardiometabolic disease, that eating these foods can definitely worsen their condition. So just as important as taking your medications, getting enough sleep, making sure you're hydrated, being physically active, recognizing that these are a risk factor and they can make it very difficult for your medication to do its work. You can definitely out-eat insulin. You can out-eat GLP-1. You can out-eat SGLT2 inhibitors, especially if a lot of the diet's coming from these ultra processed foods. I would recommend having a little handout. If you want to talk to me, I've already made one. I can give you a copy of it, but just provide examples of what these foods are so they understand it's the soda, the energy drinks, the hot dogs, the sausages, it's the instant soup, the chicken nuggets, chips, frozen meals, ready to eat meals. Even the flavored yogurts that they might be giving their kids in those little tubes, they have a ton of added sugars and artificial colors and sweeteners. And give people a goal. Say, hey, maybe if you're eating 10 or 15 of these a day, try to decrease two each week. Just have a little less, a little less, a little less, with your goal being less than two servings a day. That's what I recommend. There's no research saying that's the healthy threshold, but most of the studies I saw is like once a person gets up over two or three servings, then the risk for complications and risk for getting some sort of poor management goes up. Encourage your patients to be aware of what they're consuming. People are looking at labels now. Definitely a lot more than when I started out as a dietitian many years ago. People are looking at labels, but they don't know what they're looking at. So have some of the worst culprits for poor health listed. Have a little checklist for them. And if you see these on a label, they're ultra processed foods. And again, that carrageenan, if you look it up, it looks like a natural emulsifier, but it is one that's very, very hard on our gut microbiome. Additional tips, it's really hard to make behavioral changes when you're sleep deprived. And also, there's been some really interesting studies where they give people a whole array of foods. They just give like a buffet of foods, and they say, eat whatever you want. And then they force them to have a very bad night's sleep, 4 or 5 hours of sleep. And the next day, they put the exact same food out there and they just monitor what they eat. And on average, people ate about 500 extra calories the day following sleep deprivation. And those calories were not health foods. They were not whole foods. They weren't even lightly processed foods. The majority of those excess calories came straight from these ultra processed foods. That brain is just hungry for a dopamine hit. It's struggling from that sleep deprivation. So don't forget that you could sabotage your efforts by being totally sleep deprived and then going out and trying to decrease your intake of these ultra processed foods. Same thing with drinking water. If you're dehydrated, especially as we get older, we start to misinterpret that dehydration or that thirst as hunger. And so sometimes that can trigger overeating or reaching for these ultra processed foods. Focus on what foods you're going to add, not just what foods you're going to take out. So great, you're not going to have chips with lunch. What will you have? Maybe you'll switch it to a cracker, and then you'll switch that cracker to an apple. And so gradually making changes so it's not such a harsh feeling that you've deprived yourself of something that your brain really wants. The other thing that's shifted over the last 20 years, really, in the world of nutrition and dietetics is we no longer do nutrient recommended diets. So, gone are the days where I say, hey, less than 10% of your diet should come from saturated fat. Don't eat more than 25 grams of added sugars. We can give those as background, but it's better to give people a eating pattern to look at, to kind of mimic. So the DASH diet, the Mediterranean diet, vegetarian, flexitarian, which is just basically vegetarian with a little bit of meats added or fish or chicken and just a lot less meat than the traditional standard American diet. So these eating patterns, it's it pattern you're eating. You're eating more fruits and vegetables, more lentils, more nuts and seeds, less of the processed foods versus counting up the individual nutrients in the food. And like I said, making small dietary changes are always better than just doing cold turkey. I'll never touch another processed food again in my life. So maybe eliminate one ultra processed food choice per week. Maybe add one healthy food per week or try one new recipe. If you don't have time to do all this stuff, almost all Medicaid and all commercial plans cover a registered dietitian for medical nutrition therapy. Only Medicare limits the type of patient you could refer to a dietitian, and that would be someone with diabetes or somebody with kidney failure or on dialysis, or kidney disease or on dialysis. So otherwise, you can refer all those individuals to see a dietitian. A lot of employers now will allow you to see a dietitian. I know it's like sometimes 6 hours a year you get, and you don't even have to have anything wrong. And that's one thing we do as dietitians is help look at what you're doing, look at some small changes, and then trying to give you recipes and small ways to change these behaviors with realistic goals. Remember that food policy matters. I know that this is probably something we don't have a lot of time to do right now, but there's been some really cool studies done where the government in Chile, Mexico, Peru, a couple other countries, where they put warning labels on ultra processed food. In Chile, they just warned people of sugar content. And so on the front of the label, it would say, warning, this contains high quantity levels of sugar that puts you at risk for the following things. And within a very short period of time, as a country, they were able to look in certain pockets and see a 15% reduction in added sugar. So some of these packaging policy labels definitely make a difference. There are 8 cities here in the United States. No no state yet has gotten this passed, but where they put a excessive tax like you do on cigarettes, and then you use that money to help pay for the diseases that that product causes. And that also makes it less accessible. So if a bottle of soda is now $5 versus $1, people are less likely to buy it. And there's been some success with seeing decreased consumption with those as well. California just passed a law recently that they are now requiring that ultra processed foods be eliminated from school nutrition in California. And they have till the year 2035 to get them completely eliminated from the cafeterias. I was super excited to see that pass. WIC and SNAP initiatives that the money that you would have on those cards would go further with whole foods, but you would get less money that goes towards processed foods. So it'd actually be like a point system where you have so many points, and when you buy the food that's healthy, you actually use less points than you would on the unprocessed or on the processed foods. And there's also some laws like California and Arizona. They're looking at defining ultra processed foods and then labeling foods as also ultra processed foods. And then there is a lot of talk right now. Nothing has happened yet, but making it so that kids aren't exposed to the marketing of the ultra processed foods, just like we did with smoking. So I see the trend in food policy following the trend that we had for smoking. Again, totally dependent on current government affairs right now, which again, today is not the time or the place to talk about that, but we'll see what happens over these next few years. So, call to action. This is my last slide for today. So, really screen your patients. Think about asking about ultra processed foods like you do about cigarette smoking, about vaping, about alcohol intake. Think of this as a checklist for also a person's health. Educate consistently, kind of normalize that conversation. We're not trying to shame people in the fact that they eat a lot of these. Remember, 75% of their choices when they go out in the world are going to be these foods staring right at them. It's kind of like telling someone not to smoke, and then they go into a store and 75% of the shelf is filled with cigarettes, and only 25% is filled with good food choices. Prescribed evidence-based diets, if people want a diet, there's very good evidence that all four of these diets lead to better health. Again, there are ultra-processed vegetarian food, which we didn't talk too much about, and those also are not healthy. So yeah, just because it's a vegetarian potato chip, it's still a potato chip. Model behaviors. Look at your own diet. How many of these food choices are you consuming? Try to decrease them so you can share that experience with your patients. Remember to refer people to dietitians. This is what we do for a living, and we have a lot more time than you do to talk to your patients about food. And then advocate for change. Really support those local policies, anything to do with changing school or SNAP or labeling, and look at how it might help your patients have better quality of food choices. And also, I know here in Bend, we have a lot of gardens that promote gardening and also look at schools using the foods that come from the gardens. So promote local garden and local food banks and see what types of foods they have. So my quote for the ending here is that individual choices always matter, but that systemic change really creates that lasting impact. So I hope you're all going to have a beautiful day. I would love to hear from you. This is my email and my phone number, and please reach out if you have any questions or if any other ideas for something you'd like me to speak on, or if you'd like to talk to me about consulting as well. So hope you have a great day.